Recording in progress.
Okay. Let me just the phone down. Okay, so this week Sedra is Parshas Chukas, and of course Parshas Chukas discusses, and I've discussed it many times, about the Parah Aduma, how the red cow, the ashes of the red cow that was burnt in a specific manner, was mixed with Mayim Chaim, with living waters, waters that from a spring or a river is put in a vessel, and on the third and twice during the 7 days of the Tahara process, the person who came in contact with the dead is sprinkled with the combination of the ashes of the Parah Aduma together with the living waters, and and then the person goes to the mikveh and becomes tar, becomes purified. Until the purification process is completed, this person can't come in contact with anything holy. He can't go into the Beis HaMikdash. He's tamei. He's contaminated. And the Torah seems to have a very strict approach into limiting the person who comes in contact with a dead human body and his involvement with holiness. With going to the Beis HaMikdash, of course, it doesn't interfere with his performance of most of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Of course, he can still daven. Today, we're all tamei mess. Nevertheless, we are obligated in all the mitzvahs of the Torah. But mitzvahs that have to do with the Beis HaMikdash, with kachim, with holy objects that were associated with the Beis HaMikdash, with trumos, and as objects of that nature, a person who was tamei couldn't come in contact with it. Now, the question is, and the Gemara says that the Chazal tell us that the Parah Aduma, the mitzvah of Parah Aduma was a process of was the mitzvah Parah Aduma was a kapara, was atonement for the golden calf. But also very interesting is the Das Gein Mibalatosvis. The Das Gein Mibalatosvis identifies the mitzvah of reading Kriyas Hatorah, and specifically Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael giving 3 aliyos, identifies it with Parah Aduma. And it says, I don't know where he got this remez from, but it says that V'nasan alav mayim chayim al keli, the Kohen, who sprinkles some of the ashes of the parah, of the cow that was burnt, together with living waters, the waters of a spring or a river. So he puts it el keli. He puts the ashes in the water in a vessel, keli, and the drasha that the Das Gein Mibalatosvis says keli stands for Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, and he says this is a remez. This is an indication that when we're under laboratory conditions, when you have Kriyas Hatorah, when you have the reading of the Torah, you have to call up a Kohen, a Levi, and a Yisrael. The Gemara in Bava Kama says that Moshe Rabbeinu instituted that you should read initially 3 psukim, either that either one person read 3 psukim or 3 people each reads 1 pasuk, and it's suggested that the additional takana that 3 people read, that was after special distinctions were made between Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. When Moshe Rabbeinu made the original takana, there was not yet that distinction between Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. So at that time, Moshe Rabbeinu instituted that it's enough that one person gets an aliyah. But the reason they instituted, once they instituted, the Torah instituted special distinctions between Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, so the takana either changed or there was an additional approach, and that additional approach was to have 3 aliyahs, one aliyah for a Kohen, another aliyah for a Levi, and the third aliyah for Yisrael. Now, in those days, those who got the aliyah, they read the Torah. Now, so the question is, and the Das Ken Baltosis seems to address it. What is the connection between the halacha Parah Aduma, the halacha preparing the red cow, the ashes of the red cow, and sprinkling the dead person with the ashes of the red cow, together with living waters? What does that have to do with Kriyas Hatorah? So he says, because the pasuk says here, the pasuk says, that you together with the ashes of the red cow that is sprinkled on the person who became contaminated because of his contact with the dead, it's together with water. And we know that Chazal tell us, or sages tell us in Bava Kama, that Torah is identified metaphorically. It is identified with water. When did Moshe Rabbeinu institute? Kriyas Hatorah? So that was after the Vayelchu Shlosha Yomim Bamidbar V'lo Matzu Mayim. They went 3 days in the desert. The Torah tells us in Bishalach, and they did not find any water. So Vayisha Moshe Bnei Yisrael Miyamsuf Vayetzu Midbar Ashur Vayelchu Shlosha Yomim Bamidbar V'lo Matzu Mayim. They weren't able to find water. So the Dorshe Rishimos, the expounders of the verses say, Ein Mayim El Torah. Water is Torah. Shenemar, as it says in the prophets and the Nevi'im, Hai Kol Samei L'Chula Mayim. Everyone who's thirsty, go to the water. And there the Torah talks about a time when people will be thirsty, not for food and not for water, but for Torah. So when it says, everyone who is thirsty, go for the water, metaphorically, it has reference to Torah. So he says, so when the Chachamim saw that the Jewish people at that time, because of 3 days without water, they became thirsty. And as a result of that, in Parshas Bishalach, they rebelled against HaKadosh Baruch Hu and against Moshe. So because of that, the according to the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu instituted Kriyas Hatorah, that there shouldn't be 3 days that the Jewish people go without Torah. Now that's why we have Kriyas Hatorah on Sunday. And then, on Monday, we have Kriyas Hatorah on Monday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you have Kriyas Torah. Friday, Shabbos, you have Kriyas Torah. And then Monday, again, you have Kriyas Torah. So because the not having Torah is identified with thirst, and it's interesting, thirst, the Gemara says, they became exhausted. It represented a stage of exhaustion. So, and this led them to rebellion. And we could understand exhaustion is identified with tiredness. And the tiredness is identified with depression. And the depression, in order to prevent spiritual depression, the Chachamim instituted that there should be Kriyas Hatorah. There shouldn't be a 3-day period where the Jewish people are not exposed to Torah. And because of that, we have Kriyas. There isn't a 3-day period that there isn't a mitzvah of Kriyas Hatorah. And it's interesting, the Sefer HaMenucha, he brings another source for it. And also at the end of Parshas, Bishalach, this at the end of Parshas Bishalach, it says, they continue on their journey, Al Pi Hashem. They camped in Refidim. And there was no water for the people or for the nation to drink. By Yaravam and Moshe. So they fought with Moshe. And they said, give us water and we'll drink. And ultimately, then Moshe gives them water from the rock, and they have water, and then I assume, so there too, Mayim is Torah, and I assume Sefer HaMenucha wanted to identify it with what happened immediately afterwards, because immediately afterwards, immediately afterwards, as a result of that sin, of the Jewish people complaining, of revolting, so Amalek attacks the Jewish people, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Ksov zosi karin b'sefer." Write this as a remembrance in the sefer. So there's an allusion. The Sefer Menucha doesn't add that, but I assume that that's what it means. There is an allusion to Kriyas Torah, because in other words, we have to remember what Amalek did, and perhaps what brought Amalek through the reading of the Torah. So there was an allusion to Kriyas Torah. And there too, it also mentions Mayim. And here too, it says in the process of purifying a person who became contaminated for coming in contact with the dead. So the Torah talks about Mayim, about water also. And so they apply here too. The Das Ken Valtosis, Ein Mayim El Torah. And this is a remez that when it comes to Torah, when it comes to Kriyas Torah, Keli, Kohen Levi Yisrael, you have to call a Kohen Levi and a Yisrael. And the idea of calling Kohen Levi Yisrael is the idea that it's all of the Jewish people have a part of the Torah. All of the Jewish people are necessary for the Torah, and all the Jewish people have a necessity. The Torah has a necessity for all the Jewish people, and all the Jewish people have a necessity for the Torah. Now, but we have to understand when it talks about rebellion and all that, Okay, we understand the idea of the Torah here, but what's the idea of the Torah in regard to the Parah Aduma? Now, now Chazal tell us, and I've discussed this in the past, and I'm going to mention quickly what I said in the past, but I'm going to suggest something new also, that the Parah Aduma was a kapara, was an atonement for the Egel Hazav, for the golden calf. The way some of the Mefarshim, Rashi brings it in the name of Moshe Hadarshan. It seems to have a basis in the Medrashim also. Let the Egel Hazav, let the Parah. The Parah is the mother cow, the adult cow. Clean up the mess that was made by the child cow. The egel, an egel is a young cow. So let it clean up the mess. What does clean up the mess mean? In other words, the kapara, the atonement. The sin is the mess. The sin of the Egel Hazav, of worshiping the Egel Hazav. That was the mess. And the Egel Hazav is not just, it's the symbol of the sins of the Jewish people. So the red cow, the ashes, the use of the ashes of the red cow, that's symbolic of that's the atonement for the Egel Hazav. Now, I would assume that part of the idea is, in other words, the child, the parent, makes an atonement for the child. And we find that, let's say, Torah tells us that if a person acts in an improper manner, ultimately he might have children that act improperly. Ben Sora Mora, and it says Avera Goreris Avera. In other words, sometimes a parent, the way the parent acts plays a role in the way the children act. So perhaps this is the symbolism that the Medrash and Moshe Hadarshan are trying to bring about. Why is it the fault of the parent? In other words, we have to perhaps see our attachment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not just looking back, but we have a responsibility not just to look back, but we have a responsibility when it comes to perpetuation of the Torah to look forward also. And the way we act has an impact on the way our children and future generations are attacked. And it's very interesting. I mentioned this, that Yom Kippur, we say Yizkor. The other holidays, the Ashkenazim say Yizkor also, but in the other holidays, that was a later custom. But the recitation of Yizkor originally was associated with Yom Kippur we learned by Kaper la'amcha Yisrael hachayim v'hamesim. We see kapar in Yom Kippur, not just for the dead, but not just for the living, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. What does it have to do with us? But sometimes the sin of our ancestors, and it could be an altogether form of sin, could be altogether different. Moshe Feinstein, I think, said, "V'shamru b'nei Yisrael as Shabbos, lasos as Shabbos l'torosam." That when we observe Shabbos, we have to observe Shabbos in a manner that Shabbos will be observed for generations. He says, if a person observes Shabbos, he's careful about every malacha, every form of work, all lamed tes malachas, all 39 forms of forbidden work. But he stands there Shabbos looking at his watch. Maybe, when will Shabbos be over? I have so much to do. That also has an impact on our children. With us, it might not have an impact on the way we fulfill the commandments of Shabbos. But it will have an impact on our children that won't look forward to Shabbos. And if they don't look forward to Shabbos, they being one generation removed from our ancestors, one generation further. So that would lead them to not observe Shabbos. So when we observe Shabbos, we have to observe Shabbos in a manner that future generations will want to observe Shabbos. We, because of our ancestors, because of our education, because of our environment, of what we were exposed and what we were not exposed to, we couldn't be Mechal Shabbos. But future generations, they'll have a different set of circumstances confronting them. And if their attitude that they receive from us about Shabbos is not the proper attitude, even though they see that we observe it, on the contrary, the nature of our observance, the way we observe it, will have an effect on them not to observe Shabbos. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael es Shabbos, lasos es Shabbos l'toros. And what is true about Shabbos, of course, Shabbos is most important. Especially Shabbos is something that should be observed as a family. I've always mentioned that my uncle would say, what's the difference? Although the same is true about Yom Tov also, what's the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov? Yom Tov, we go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shabbos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us. He comes to our house. And our children have to be exposed to that experience. And this is true to a large degree about all the mitzvahs of Torah. That it has to be. So it could be. So that's why we have to say Yizkor. That's just Aval anachnu v'avolseinu chatanu. We and our ancestors sinned because it's our ancestors' attitude, our ancestors' sin that affects us. So we have to, in a sense, seek out kapara for that also. We have to evaluate what led us to sin. Yes, we look up to our ancestors, and there's no question that our ancestors were better than us. And what they did might not have had as a negative effect on them as it had upon us. But we have to learn not to repeat that mistake. They could have been tzaddikim and all that. But tzaddikim also make mistakes. And the impact on them might not have been as great as the impact upon us. We learn from our experiences. And that's certainly true today. It's certainly true in regard to Eretz Yisrael. It's certainly true that with the changing situation, if Eretz Yisrael is not given the proper significance, then our children and grandchildren, chas v'shalom, might be joining the people on the college campuses who are protesting against Israel, who are identifying Klal Yisrael with the worst of the Rishayim the world ever saw. So, to a certain degree, the mother, we see kapara for former generations, but figuratively we have to realize that what we do is going to affect future generations also. And perhaps that's the idea that the Medrash is telling us, that the mother has to clean up the mess that the child did. In other words, the child mess might have been caused in some indirect way by us as well. And as the child has to seek kapara for us, because he became affected by what we did. Now, but in any case, but I want to explain the idea of the connection, some additional explanations between the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, and the Parah Aduma. Now, the first explanation I've mentioned many times. There are two approaches to life. One approach to life is to see life as a process of living. And the other approach to life is to see life as a process of dying. I've mentioned this. Every day we live is an additional day of life. But every day we live is a day closer to death. And the question is, what is our perspective of life? Do we see life as a process of living? Or do we see life as a process of dying? And we see, I mentioned that Esav, when he sold the Bechorah to Yaakov, when he sold the birthright to Yaakov, what did he sell it for? He sold it for a pot of lentil soup, red lentil soup. Perhaps there's some significance in the redness there also. And then he had Yaakov pour the soup, according to the Medrash, down his mouth. And when he explained why he sold the Bechorah, the spiritual birthright, to Yaakov, he said, Anochi holech lamos, I'm going to die. He made the Bechorah, the birthright, the spiritual birthright that he might have originally had. He trampled on it. It was not worth anything. The pot of red lentil soup was worth more to him. Why? Anochi holech lamos, I'm going to die. I think, according to Chazal, this was when he was 13 years old. I'm going to die. Okay, there are all kinds of medrashim that he said there are a lot of chiyuvei misa, capital crimes that I want to commit, that the Torah identifies as capital crimes. But I think we can suggest an additional explanation. And I've mentioned that our sages tell us that when the Esav came from the Sadeh, he came in from the field. There was mourning going on in the house. Why? Esav was informed that day Avraham Avinu died. And Esav's response, according to our sages, in Mesos Azokain, if that elderly person, Avraham Avinu, passed away, Ein din vein dayan, there is no judge and there is no law. In other words, it was his confrontation with death. His grandfather died, the one the whole family looked up to, the spiritual giant. And because of this, I think, and this is not an unusual process, when we confront death, when someone close to us dies, there's a tendency to see life as a process of dying. Each day becomes a day closer to death. It's not just an additional day of life. And how does one react to death? So, the Epicurean approach, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Indulgence is one of the approaches. There are other approaches also. Indulgence. Spirituality means nothing. We might as well enjoy the physical pleasures of life. The red lentil soup meant more taste of at that point than the Bechorah, than the birthright, which was spiritual. And then we find similar, but almost the opposite reaction. When Yaakov was told, Torah Yosef, that Yosef, of course it wasn't true, but he was given the impression Yosef was ripped apart by an animal. When he was shown Yosef's clothes with its many colors, with the blood stains on it, which of course were animal blood stains, but he thought it was Yosef's blood stains. So he sank into a depression, into a process of mourning. And his children and grandchildren and his household, they tried to console him. But Vayimayim, he refused consolation. And what did he say? He said, Anochi ered livni shola, I will go down to my son in my grave. Life became a process of dying. But when he heard, oh, Joseph Kai, when he was told, when his sons returned from Egypt with the message of Yosef, come down to Egypt, I'm an assistant to the king, Mishnah Lamelech. So, Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Aviyah. Yaakov was able to reverse the process, which is not an easy task. When someone sees life as a process of dying, if it's done immediately, people see that when someone dies, it's close to them, but they're able to overcome it. And some people are just not able to come back, to get back on track, to reverse the process. Yaakov, even after all these years of mourning and depression, Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Avihem, Vayechi Yaakov Beretz Mitzrayim Shvas Reishana. Doesn't say Vayeshev Yaakov. He resided. He lived. Because up to that point, he wasn't living. He was dying. But he was able to reverse the process. In a sense, when we look at the ego, the time of the ego, the Medrash tells us, Kiboshesh Moshe, Moshe, according to the calculations of the Jewish people, Moshe should have returned. And he was late on their basis of their calculations. And the Medrash tells us that the sun made it appear to them that Moshe died. They said, Tizeh ha'ish, this mortal man, Moshe, lo yadanu mehayalo. We don't know what happened to him. So what did they do? They made an egel hazav, a golden calf. And what did they do? They gave sacrifices. They said, Elu Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God, O Israel. But then, Vayochlu, they ate. Vayishtu, they drank. Vayikumu l'tzachai, they got up to be merry. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That was their reaction to seeing life, encountering death, and seeing life as a process of dying. Now, what is Parah Aduma? Parah Aduma is Parah Aduma is the Parah Aduma was the red. The red is the symbol of sin. All the Mefarshim point that out. Even for your sins will be as red as scarlet. In other words, it's red is the symbol of sin. Red is also the symbolism of Esav, of indulgence of Esav. Kashal Galbino, God says, I'll make it white if you do tshuva in Yeshaya. If you'll do tshuva. So the person, the red represents the sin, and as a result of the sin, what does the sin manifest itself? It manifests itself in an attitude of seeing life as a process of dying rather than as a process of living. And the red parah, the red cow, is burnt into ashes. Ashes represents complete destruction. And it's put together with mayim chayim, with living waters, the symbol of life. It had to be taken from a river, had to be taken from a stream. That symbolizes life. In other words, the idea is the idea of being able to reverse the process. A person who encounters death is likely to fall into a depression, ninalu, exhaustion. He has to reverse the process. And how do you reverse the process? You reverse the process by you reverse the process by recognizing what the mistake of those who made Egel Hazav was. We can't let our life to be a process of dying. Because if we see our life as a process of dying, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes, we encounter situations that are depressing. But we have to understand that from destruction, there can be life also. And in fact, the whole idea of Tahara, when a person puts his head underneath the waters of the mikveh, a person is not in a medium where he can survive. Theoretically, when you put your head underneath the water, since can't last long. to be identified with a process of dying. But then there are rayas for it. The process of tahara starts when you start going out of the water. In other words, from the process, a process of dying can lead into a process of living. We can reverse the process, just as Yaakov Avinu reversed the process. And in a sense, that's the idea of Ninalu. When the Jewish people went to the when the Jewish people were in the when they're going to Midbar, and the waters were bitter and they couldn't drink waters that were bitter, or there wasn't water available. So because of those incidents, and it's very interesting, by Amalek it says, you were tired and worn out, tired before worn out, because the tiredness wasn't the physical tiredness, it was an attitude of tiredness. And that is depression. And what is the metaher? What gives them the ability to reverse the process? The Torah gives them the ability to reverse the process. And for that matter, all of tshuva, returning to Torah, that's a process, that's a reversal of the process. And that's why Kriyas Hatorah gave the Jews the ability to reverse the process. In a sense, it shared the same perspective of Parah Aduma, to be able to reverse the process. And that's why we learn out Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. The Torah is for all Jews, and all Jews are necessary for the Torah. And Torah can help every individual Jew, regardless of his station in life. Not only that, each person is different, but all Jews are necessary. And I want to suggest another explanation. Now, when the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, in the laws of Tshuva, he says that a person, when he recognizes that he sinned, he says, Ana Hashem, please God, the vidui. This is not the vidui of Yom Kippurim, but technically a Jew has to say vidui anytime he realizes that he sinned and wants to change his ways. He says, Ana Hashem, please God. Chatasi avisi pashati, I sinned. I sinned willingly. I sinned by mistake. I sinned in rebellion. Vasisi kach v'kach, I did such and such. I sinned before you. What do you have to say, I sinned before you for? Why the emphasis on lefanecha, before you? Now, when you look at the Egel Hazav, one wonders, 40 days beforehand, the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma. They were on a level higher than Malachim. And 40 days later, they stand before the Egel Hazav, before the golden calf, and they say, Elo Alecha Yisrael. How is it possible? So I explained already, depression, they thought Moshe died, the situation changed, whatever it is. But there's another point here. I've mentioned very often that we say in the Haggadah, the Dayenus, Ilu kirvanu lifnei har Sinai, k'lo nasan lanu es Hatorah Dayenu. If you had brought us to Mount Sinai and didn't give us the Torah Dayenu, that in itself would have been a very great thing. But what would have been so great about coming to Mount Sinai? Not tourists. What would have been great about coming to Mount Sinai, coming close to Mount Sinai, and not getting the Torah? But Kervanu doesn't mean he brought us close to Mount Sinai, but it means he brought us close to him at Mount Sinai. The Jewish people undoubtedly understood that when they said Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. When they committed themselves to Torah, there was an obligation to perpetuate the Torah of Sinai. But it's not enough. My father would always say that at Mount Sinai, there was the experience of Sinai. My father would call it the fire of Sinai. And there was the voice of Sinai. And my uncle would say there was the kolos ubrokim of Sinai. And there was the Torah of Sinai. Same idea, but still vague. What I think it is. What is the experience of Sinai? It's not a fireworks show just after July 4th. The fire of Sinai. The kolos ubrokim of Sinai. That's all expressive of sensing the presence of God. Even if the Jewish people had not gotten the Torah at Sinai, but they had revelation in a manner that they hadn't had before. They sensed the presence of God. And they understood we have to perpetuate the Torah. But after Moshe died, and after they thought Moshe died, they weren't able to perpetuate that experience. You could take Sfarim and you can learn. The problem is perpetuating the experience of Sinai, perpetuating the experience of sensing the presence of God. And if we don't perpetuate that experience, then it's very easy to sin. A Jew doesn't sin if he recognizes God is there. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. You have to say, was talking last week with Jordan Sherrick from St. Louis on the phone. And he emphasized to me, said in the name of Samson Raphael Hirsch, Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Shavisi Shava. That's the idea of seeing God on the same level with you. And I think this is my own understanding. I didn't see what Rav Hirsch wrote, but my own understanding, it was that when someone is higher or lower, you don't see him constantly. You have to move your neck. But if it's right in front of you, then you see him constantly. We see in last week's Sedra, when the Jewish people saw the earth open up and swallow Vayanuso, they ran away. But Vayihim Mochras, it was the next day. And that Bria, that new creation that they saw the previous day that frightened them, wasn't there right in front of them. So they turned to Moshe and Aaron and they said, Atem hamitem sam Hashem. When it's not right in front of you, you're able to not see it. You're able to not remember it. That's why the staff of Aaron had to be held permanently in the Beis HaMikdash. Because it's easy. There's very often by Yehim Machras, it was the next day. We forget. And this is a universal thing. We forget because sometimes we don't want to remember. Look at the reaction to October 7th. By Yehim Machras. That Menuvel, the head of the UN, who was the friend of Arafat, Yamach Shemo, he says, wow, he's against what was done in October 7th, but it wasn't done in a vacuum. The raping of the Jewish women, that wasn't done in a vacuum. No, it wasn't done in a vacuum. It was done by the schooling that the anti-Semites are perpetuating generation after generation. The putting of little children in ovens and enjoying it. But Vayihim Machras. And look at all these people. Vayihim Machras was the next day. That day, people run to Israel to show support. But what happens in the Machras the next day? Unfortunately, Vayihim Machras, there are reminders. But if the reminder is not there, we have a tendency not to remember. Moshe Rabbeinu was the reminder of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when Moshe Rabbeinu was gone, they built an Egel Hazav. Tumah, especially Tumah's mess, that separates us from Dusha. First of all, the dying process itself can separate us from Dusha when we focus on it. But in addition, the dying process, and you see, that's why Chazal said, if someone who's tamei, someone who comes in contact with a mess, as Hatorah, when someone comes in contact with a mess, he doesn't go to the Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash, that's the presence of God. He's tamei. He can't partake in karbanos. Karbanos also. Karbanos comes close to God. Karev. The process of death is not associated. People like to say that it's associated. Now he's with God. On the contrary, you find the Chachamim, when they were dying, to them, yes, there's Olam Haba and all that, there's closeness to God. But we increase our closeness to God when we do mitzvahs. The Rambam, the Gra, the story is, was crying before before there's stories of Tanoim like that also. He said, here, with a small amount of money, I could get tzitzis for my clothes. I could fulfill mitzvahs. Life is a process of living. In fact, what gives us life? What gives us life, according to most of the Mekubalim, is a chelek elokai mimal. It's the godliness that's put into us. So so death, that when we feel pushed away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and when one encounters death, there are always some of that feeling. So the death represents, certainly from a halachic perspective, separation between man and God. And what we have to do is we have to negate we have to negate we have to negate the egel situation. The egel situation, what brought about the egel? How did the Jewish people come to say Elul Hachel Yisrael? They didn't sense the presence of God. And when we say vidui, Pashati Lefanecha, I have to understand how I came to sin. I made believe that God wasn't there, but you were there. And if I realize that you're there, if I see God, Shabishi Hashem Lenegdi Summit, it's on the same level. If I see it constantly in front of me, so I can't come to sin. So this is the idea of Parah Aduma. It's negation of the golden calf. The golden calf was, when Moshe's not here, I don't see the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't sense his presence. And death is identified, and very often is identified, as Asaph said, if that elderly person died, les din les dayan, there is no judge, and there is no law. So the idea is the Egel Hazah, the Parah Aduma represents a negation of the Egel Hazah. It represents the Parah Aduma gives me the ability to go to the Beis HaMikdash, to sense the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In a sense, that's what Kriyas Hatorah is. Kriyas Hatorah is not just learning Torah. My uncle discusses it at length, that Kriyas Hatorah is experiential, experiencing Torah. But it's more than experiencing Torah. It's experiencing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's experiencing Maimon Har Sinai. In fact, in the second in Ezra instituted 10 psukim corresponding with Aseres Dibros. We have to learn 10 psukim. Moshe instituted 3 psukim, but Ezra instituted 10 psukim. It can't be just Kriyas Torah. Every pasuk is the Aseres Dibros. All of Torah was included in the Aseres Dibros, certainly in the experience of the Aseres Dibros. The Gemara Megillah says the 3, the 5, and the 7, those represent the guards of the king. In other words, by Kriyas Torah, we have to see as God being there. We have to experience Kriyas Torah. And we have to negate the experience of the Egel Hazav. That's the connection between Kriyas Hatorah, the Egel Hazav, and the Parah Aduma. The Parah Aduma is a negation of the Egel Hazav. The Parah Aduma is a negation of not experiencing the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It gives us the ability to once again to re-experience, to go from a stage of non-experiencing into a stage of experiencing, to go from a stage of dying into a process of living. And the process of living is in the having the chelik elokai mimal in us at every moment of our lives.
Okay, questions in the chat. I have a few already.
Okay.
Some pretty perceptive questions here. If red is the color of sin, why do people see red as the color to go against the ayin hara? And yes, I know that Soloveichik is not into ayin hara, but I trust his answer.